One number to start, 1,500. That's how many Patriot interceptor missiles the U.S. has fired since this war began, according to recent military assessments, leaving roughly 1,000 in the entire stockpile. Not, Trump lied about everything. Not, the U.S. is defenseless. One specific number, from one specific set of assessments, sitting underneath a much messier story about denials, AI-generated images, and a president posting war threats from his golf club. By the end of this breakdown you'll understand exactly what Trump actually posted, why it's not quite the fake war images story the headlines are selling, and why the real story here is arguably more concerning than the exaggerated one. Let's get the framing right immediately, because this is a case where the true version and the viral version both involve real deception, just not the same deception. Trump did not fabricate footage claiming a strike had already happened when it hadn't. What he actually did, according to multiple outlets including the Times of Israel, Notice, and Breitbart, was post a series of AI-generated images to Truth Social explicitly depicting future or symbolic military action, one captioned, "Strike on KHARG," referencing KHARG Island, Iran's main crude oil export terminal, another showing Trump standing on an Iranian oil tanker holding an American flag captioned, "It's our oil tanker now." And another captioned, "No more engines," showing an Iranian ship being destroyed. These are threats and warnings rendered as images, posted on the same day the U.S. paused its strike campaign. That's meaningfully different from secretly staging a fake event and presenting it as real documentary evidence, which is the specific kind of deception exposed posting fake war images implies to most people scrolling past a thumbnail. Here's how this is sourced, because a story involving a sitting president, classified munitions assessments, and open-source images deserves real receipts. This draws on reporting from the Times of Israel's live war coverage, Notice's White House reporting, Israel Hayam, Breitbart's Axios-sourced interview coverage, NBC's Meet the Press interview with UN Ambassador Mike Waltz, and Trump's own on-record comments to the Wall Street Journal and French outlet LCI. Where these sources overlap, I'll show you the overlap. Where the record is genuinely murky, I'll say so instead of smoothing it over. Let's trace the actual sequence of events, because the order things happened in matters enormously here. According to Notice, the U.S. halted airstrikes on Iran this past Friday after 13 consecutive days of attacks, a pause that came as news reports raised alarms about depleted stockpiles of American missiles, with Trump himself suggesting a possible diplomatic solution was forming. In public remarks at the White House that same Friday, Trump described Iran's leadership as being, in his words, by far the most serious he'd seen them in terms of negotiating, while acknowledging they might not yet be ready to make a deal. UN Ambassador Mike Waltz reinforced that diplomatic framing on Sunday, telling NBC's Meet the Press that the pause was giving diplomacy some space. And then, hours after Waltz said that, according to multiple outlets who all independently confirmed the same timeline, Trump posted that entire string of AI-generated images threatening renewed strikes on Iranian oil infrastructure and shipping. Two arms of the same administration putting out opposite signals on the same day isn't necessarily a coordination failure. It's arguably a deliberate pressure tactic. Let your ambassador sound conciliatory on national television while the president simultaneously posts imagery designed to remind Tehran that the alternative to a deal is still very much on the table. Now let's get into the munitions question directly, because this is where the hiding the truth framing actually has real teeth, just not in the way most coverage packages it. When Trump denied reports that the U.S. was running low on munitions, telling the Wall Street Journal the U.S. has, in his words, far more munitions than anyone in the world, and far more than we need, that denial was made against a specific backdrop. Recent assessments cited by Israel Hayam indicating the U.S. military has used at least 1,500 Patriot missiles since the war with Iran began, leaving approximately 1,000 remaining in stockpile, alongside separate concerns raised about terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors, the THAAD system. Security experts quoted in that same reporting warned the U.S. could face a critical shortage if those same munitions are simultaneously needed in other global theaters, given that American air defense stockpiles aren't infinite and are shared across multiple potential conflict zones at once. Here's the part that actually undercuts Trump's flat denial the most directly, and it didn't come from a leak or an anonymous source. It came from his own UN ambassador. Mike Waltz, on the same Meet the Press appearance where he talked about giving diplomacy room, also conceded, in his own words, that a lot of weapons have been depleted, attributing that depletion specifically to the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war and separate fighting against the Houthis competing for the same stockpiles. Waltz then pivoted to insisting the military has everything that it needs to continue the campaign against Iran specifically. So within the same television interview, you have both an acknowledgement that significant munitions have been depleted and an assurance that current needs are still covered. Those two things aren't necessarily contradictory. A military can have depleted some stockpiles while still having enough for its immediate task, but it's a considerably more complicated picture than Trump's blanket, far more than we need, framing suggests on its own. There's a genuinely important historical wrinkle to this story that almost none of the coverage of this week's AI images mentioned, and it changes how you should read Trump's posting habits around this war entirely. Back in March, well before this specific incident, Trump himself publicly accused Iran of the exact behavior he's now being accused of: spreading fake war imagery. At that time, Trump claimed images circulating online showing the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier burning at sea were AI-generated fabrications, insisting the ship had never actually been attacked, and separately claimed images showing 250,000 people at a rally for Iran's new supreme leader were, in his words, totally AI-generated. Reuters, however, independently confirmed through footage taken at the Iraqi port of Basra that Iranian explosive-laden boats had indeed attacked fuel tankers in that area around the same period, and separate news organizations published verified crowd photography from the Tehran rally that Trump never directly addressed. Researchers studying this exact dynamic have a name for what happens next in situations like this: the liar's dividend, where the mere existence of convincing fake imagery lets people dismiss real, verified images as fabrications too, muddying the water for everyone trying to figure out what's actually true. That's the environment Trump was already operating in back in March, one where he was actively contesting the authenticity of real images. Now, in July, he's the one generating and distributing openly AI-made imagery himself, just for threats rather than claimed past events. The hypocrisy isn't that he's now doing the same thing Iran was accused of in March. It's narrower and arguably more revealing than that. The same president who spent months arguing that AI-generated war imagery erodes public trust in what's real is now personally flooding the same information space with AI-generated war imagery of his own, just labeled clearly enough this time that it isn't technically the same kind of deception.